It seems like everywhere you turn these days, AI is taking center stage. It's in the headlines, it's the buzzword in every tech conversation.
It really is. AI is evolving at an incredible pace. It's becoming more and more integrated into our lives on a global scale.
And that rapid progress is exactly why we're doing this deep dive.
Right.
We want to explore the crucial aspects of making sure we're developing and using AI responsibly, especially given how quickly things are moving.
Especially given its impact.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we're zeroing in on the really fascinating and distinct landscapes of India and Africa.
Yeah, they're both unique in the AI world.
Yeah. The material you shared dives into both sides. So from India, we've got this push to build AI expertise within the government.
Right.
And alongside that, there's this focus on making sure AI is truly used for the benefit of society, not just for the sake of technology.
Absolutely. Using AI as a force for good.
Right. And then shifting gears to Africa, the focus is on building AI that people can trust.
Right.
Considering all of the different ethical and societal factors that are at play there.
Yeah, very complex considerations.
Yeah. So for our listeners who are probably already pretty familiar with the basics, we're not going to rehash everything.
Right.
We really want to extract the most significant insights, those surprising nuggets, and the clear takeaways that you might not find in a typical overview.
That's the goal.
So think of this as your express route to being well-informed.
A shortcut.
A shortcut, exactly.
Yeah.
We're unpacking the really crucial aspects of developing and deploying AI effectively and ethically, specifically in India and Africa, really exploring what makes them so unique in terms of their opportunities and challenges.
It's a fascinating comparison.
It is. So let's kick things off with India.
Okay.
What does their overall approach to AI look like right now?
Well, India is definitely making some bold moves in AI. They've got their national strategy on AI, and then more recently they launched the India AI mission.
Wow.
These are pretty clear signals, I think, that they're committed to not just innovating in AI, but also building a whole ecosystem around it.
Yeah.
Encouraging startups, entrepreneurship, research. And all of this has a really strong emphasis on using AI for the benefit of society, which is really ambitious.
It is ambitious. And one thing that really jumped out in the material is the emphasis on the public sector.
Yes.
It's not just about having national strategies. It's about ensuring government officials are knowledgeable about AI, that they understand how it works, and can make informed decisions about its deployment.
It's absolutely critical.
And that's a huge challenge.
It is a huge challenge. And it's not just about understanding the tech itself. It's about grasping the broader implications of how AI can be used fairly, inclusively, and securely for everyone.
So they're developing a competency framework, right?
Exactly. This framework is meant to tackle those knowledge gaps.
Yeah.
Not just the tech side, but also the ethical considerations, and also how AI fits in with India's broader developmental goals. And it's also, interestingly, designed to help those officials advance in their careers as AI becomes more integral to their work.
So it's like they're saying, look, we can't just leave this to the tech experts. Everyone needs to be up to speed.
Yeah. Because if you don't have this understanding, at every level there's a risk, even with the best intentions, that AI deployments could end up having negative unintended consequences.
Right. You could inadvertently make existing inequalities worse.
Exactly.
So it's really about giving those in charge of overseeing AI the tools they need to do it responsibly and effectively.
Empowered decision-making.
Yeah. Now, before we get too deep into all of this, let's just quickly touch on a couple of the core AI concepts, just to make sure everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, definitions are important.
They are. So starting with machine learning.
Right. So at its core, machine learning is about allowing computers to learn from data.
Right.
Without having to program them for every single specific task.
So they're learning from experience, like a person.
Right. They can analyze massive amounts of information, spot patterns in that data, and then use those patterns to describe what's going on, make predictions about the future, or even suggest courses of action.
So they're getting smarter as they process more information.
That's the idea.
Okay, so that's machine learning. And then we're hearing so much about generative AI these days.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
It is. What's the key difference there?
Generative AI takes things a step further. It's built on really complex machine learning models called deep learning models.
Okay.
These are inspired by the structure and function of the human brain.
Fascinating.
Yeah. And these models, they're trained on huge, huge data sets. And instead of just identifying patterns, they learn the underlying structure of the data so well that they can then generate entirely new content.
Wow.
that resembles the original data.
So they're not just analyzing, they're creating.
Exactly. Creating.
Okay.
And this can be text that sounds like a human wrote it, photorealistic images, videos, music, even computer code.
And this is what's behind those tools that can create art from a text prompt.
Right, exactly. Tools like Daily and Midjourney. These are powered by generative AI.
It's mind-blowing, really.
It is, but it also amplifies this issue of the black box problem.
Right, and the Indian material specifically brought up this black box problem. What exactly does that mean, and why is it a concern, especially in areas like healthcare or finance, where decisions have real consequences?
Yeah, great point. The black box problem basically refers to this lack of transparency in how certain AI systems reach their decisions.
Okay.
You give the system data, it spits out an answer, but the process it used to get there is hidden.
Like a magic trick.
Yeah, kind of. And this is a big deal when AI is making critical decisions, like in healthcare. Imagine an AI diagnosing a patient, or in finance, approving or denying loans.
Right.
If we can't understand why the AI made that decision, it becomes incredibly difficult to ensure it was fair and accurate, not influenced by bias or errors.
And for individuals, that lack of transparency erodes trust.
Exactly. If you don't understand how a decision affecting you was made, how can you trust it? And for developers, it makes it tough to identify problems and improve the system. And for policymakers, it makes regulating AI a nightmare.
So it's a hurdle to AI adoption overall.
It is a big one.
Now, the material also talks about the stages where the Indian government needs to be involved in the AI lifecycle. What are those key points of engagement?
Okay, so first off, it's about picking the right AI model for the job.
Right.
Not every AI is created equal, so choosing wisely is key. Then you've got to train the AI model.
Okay.
And this means feeding it relevant and representative data.
Right.
Because if the data is bad, the AI's output will be bad. Next up is rigorous testing and validation.
Okay.
This is to make sure the model's working as expected, not introducing biases, and not creating security vulnerabilities.
Right.
And finally, you've got the actual deployment.
Yeah.
And ongoing monitoring of the AI system in the real world.
So making sure it's working as intended in practice.
Yep.
Now, the source also drew this interesting distinction between the Indian government developing their own AI solutions versus buying them from vendors.
Right.
What are the trade-offs there?
Well, building their own AI gives the government more control and potentially greater transparency.
Okay.
They can customize the AI to their specific needs and ensure it aligns with their ethical standards.
Yeah.
But it requires a lot of resources, expertise, infrastructure. It all gets expensive and time-consuming.
Okay.
Buying off-the-shelf solutions can be faster and maybe cheaper up front.
Right.
But the challenge then becomes defining your needs clearly and choosing a vendor wisely, making sure they meet your ethical standards.
So there's no easy answer. It's about finding the right approach for the specific project and needs.
Absolutely. Context is key.
Now, let's shift to the people who are actually going to be working with AI in the Indian public sector. The material broke down the necessary competencies into behavioral, functional, and domain-specific. Let's start with those behavioral competencies. What kind of traits and ways of thinking are we talking about?
So these are the human skills that are crucial. Things like systems thinking. It's understanding how AI initiatives connect to the bigger picture,
Right.
how they fit into the government operations, and what their long-term impact on society might be.
So considering the interconnectedness of everything.
Exactly. And citizen centricity is another one.
Okay.
This means putting people's needs first, especially those who are often marginalized.
Yeah.
It's about designing AI systems that are accessible and beneficial to all.
So really thinking about the impact on people.
Absolutely. And then, of course, integrity and accountability are essential.
Yeah.
Especially with AI, transparency is vital. People need to understand how decisions are being made.
Right. If you're going to use AI in government, you need to be able to explain how it's working and why.
Absolutely. And finally, there's outcome-revealed orientation. This means ensuring that AI leads to actual positive social change.
Okay.
Addressing inequalities, not just generating impressive metrics.
So it's not just about the tech being cool, it's about it making a real difference.
That's the goal.
These are all important qualities for anyone in public service.
Of course.
But they become even more crucial when you're dealing with a technology as powerful and transformative as AI.
It raises the stakes.
It does. Now, what about those functional competencies? What kind of skills are we talking about there?
These are more about the nuts and bolts, the practical side of working with AI. Data management is a big one.
Okay.
This covers everything from how data is collected and used to making sure it's secure, accurate, and ethically handled.
So understanding where data comes from, how to store it safely, how to share it appropriately.
Exactly.
That kind of thing.
Right. And then there's public procurement. This is about understanding how to buy AI solutions responsibly.
Nope.
Because there aren't specific AI procurement guidelines in place yet in India, officials need to understand the existing rules and figure out how to adapt them to this new tech.
So how to ensure that the AI solutions you're buying actually meet your ethical standards?
That's the challenge.
Yeah, interesting. And finally, let's touch on those domain-specific competencies.
Right.
The material gave examples in agriculture, healthcare, education. What kind of specialized knowledge is important in those areas?
So this is where it gets really interesting,
Yeah.
because in each sector, AI interacts with unique challenges and opportunities.
Yeah.
Like in agriculture, officials need to know how to plan AI initiatives that align with national policies,
Right.
how to use AI to maybe improve crop yields, manage resources better, that kind of thing.
Right, using AI to tackle the specific issues facing Indian agriculture.
Exactly. And then in healthcare, it's about understanding patient data, navigating health regulations, communicating effectively with medical professionals
Yeah.
about AI tools.
So it's about knowing how to use AI responsibly in a healthcare setting.
Right. And then in education, it's about understanding the existing gaps in the system
Okay.
and how AI could help personalize learning while also protecting student data and making sure teachers are properly trained.
So a lot of different applications depending on the specific needs of each sector.
Exactly. It's tailored expertise. And the material even highlighted initiatives like Future Skills Prime and YUVI.
Okay.
These programs are specifically aimed at building AI skills across various sectors.
So there's a real push to develop the workforce.
Definitely.
Wow. So India is making significant strides in building not just the technology, but also the human capacity to guide it effectively. Now let's turn our attention to Africa. The foreword in that document you shared started with a really crucial point.
Yeah. It stressed that the development and deployment of AI in Africa should first and foremost benefit the African people.
Right.
It should address local challenges, improve lives, and do so in a way that avoids negative consequences and ethical pitfalls.
So it's not just about the technology, it's about how it's used.
Absolutely. AI should be a tool for empowerment.
And it introduced this concept of boundary critique. Can you explain what that means?
Boundary critique is about carefully examining the assumptions we bring when analyzing AI in Africa.
Okay.
It's recognizing that Africa is incredibly diverse.
Right.
What works in one region might not work in another, so we can't just apply solutions developed in one context blindly.
So it's a reminder to be cautious of generalizations and to really appreciate the nuances of different African contexts.
Yeah, exactly.
The document also introduced the idea of distributed concern as a way to think about trustworthy AI in Africa.
Yeah.
What does that involve?
Distributed concern suggests that trustworthiness in AI isn't a single thing, but a collection of different concerns.
Yes.
It's about looking at the ethical implications, the socio-cultural impacts, the geopolitical factors, the economic opportunities, the need for education, and of course the technical aspects.
So it's a much broader view than just whether the AI works properly.
Right. It's about the whole picture, the values and priorities of all stakeholders.
Now, speaking of values, the concept of trust itself seems to have some interesting cultural nuances in Africa.
Absolutely. The source material highlighted that in many African languages, trust isn't just about confidence or reliability.
Okay.
It also encompasses hope, expectation, faith.
Wow, much deeper.
Yeah. It emphasizes interdependence, mutual support, reciprocity.
So it's about the relationships and connections within the community.
Exactly.
And that suggests that building trustworthy AI in Africa might need a different approach than in more individualistic societies.
It could, yeah.
The document also raised this really important point about AI in Africa often being a foreign technology. What are the implications of that?
Well, a lot of the AI tech used in Africa originates from outside the continent, often from Western countries.
Okay.
And there's concern that these technologies might not always align with local values, cultures, or needs.
Right, they're not built with the African context in mind.
Exactly. And there's a risk that this could lead to a new kind of dependency.
Right.
Where African nations become reliant on foreign tech and the values embedded in it.
And potentially repeat historical patterns of exploitation.
That's a real worry.
Yeah. So It's crucial to ensure that AI development and deployment in Africa centers the needs and perspectives of African people.
African-led innovation is key.
Absolutely.
Oh.
Now, the material also talked about various methods for adapting AI models to better fit African contexts. What are some of the techniques they mentioned?
There are a few different approaches. One is transfer learning. This is where you take a model already trained on a massive data set for a particular task and then fine-tune it for a similar task in a new context, like an African context.
Okay.
Especially when there's not a lot of local data available.
So you're leveraging existing knowledge and tailoring it to the specific needs.
Exactly. And there's domain adaptation, bridging the gap between different data sets, data augmentation to create more diverse training data, and model ensembling, combining predictions from multiple models.
So many different techniques.
There are, and each has its strengths and weaknesses. And then there's explainable AI, or XAI.
Okay.
This one's really important because it helps us understand how these adapted models are actually making decisions.
So we can be more confident that they're behaving appropriately in the new context.
Right. It's about transparency and trust.
Now, the material also touched on the current state of AI ethics discussions in Africa.
Right. It's acknowledged that formal discussions and applications of AI ethics in Africa are still kind of in their early stages compared to, say, the West or China.
Okay.
But there's a growing awareness and a lot of momentum building.
Sure.
Several African countries like Uganda, Tunisia, South Africa, Morocco, Rwanda, Kenya, Ethiopia, Algeria, they're all working on national frameworks to guide AI adoption.
Wow, so they're proactively shaping the ethical landscape.
Yeah, definitely. And big tech companies like Google and Microsoft are also investing more in Africa, and they're often saying they're committed to ethical principles sensitive to local contexts.
That's good to hear. It seems like there's a genuine concern for getting this right.
There is.
What are some of the specific areas in Africa where those concerns are most pronounced?
There's a big push for more research, greater public awareness, and regulations that address the real-world impact of AI.
Okay.
In healthcare, for instance, there's concern about the lack of African representation in data used for things like drug discovery and disease treatment.
Right, so AI solutions might not be as effective for African populations.
Exactly.
And potentially even harmful.
Yeah. And in agriculture, there's a focus on making sure AI tools are adapted for local conditions to really benefit farmers and communities.
So taking into account those cultural and infrastructural differences.
Right. It's about appropriate technology.
The material also introduced the concept of institutional trust as key for trustworthy AI in Africa. What does that mean?
So this is about trusting not just the AI itself, but the African institutions responsible for it.
Okay.
The organizations that are developing it, deploying it, overseeing it.
So trusting the whole system around the AI.
Yeah. This includes things like the reliability of the infrastructure, the integrity of the algorithms, the ethical handling of data, the accountability of the decision makers.
It's about building that trust locally.
Absolutely. It's about African agency.
And that connects to this idea of African funding for AI projects.
Yeah.
Why is that so important?
Because it helps ensure that AI development in Africa is driven by African priorities.
Okay.
There's this concern that Western-led AI initiatives might not align with the collectivist values and worldviews often found in African cultures.
Right.
And then there's the risk of what some call techno-colonialism,
Okay.
where African nations become dependent on Western software platforms' values.
So potentially leading to more control by foreign companies.
Exactly. Local funding helps avoid that trap.
So it's about self-determination and ensuring that the benefits of AI stay within Africa.
Right.
But it also comes with challenges, right?
It does. Securing local funding can be tough,
Yeah.
and there might be gaps in expertise and infrastructure.
Right.
But it's seen as crucial for long-term sustainability and ensuring that AI development truly meets African needs.
Now, the flip side of that is what they called algorithmic colonization.
Right. This is the idea that the business models and power dynamics of those big tech companies could end up shaping AI in Africa in ways that actually harm local communities,
Okay.
widening the digital divide, reinforcing existing inequalities, imposing foreign values.
So instead of empowering, it could end up being exploitative.
That's the fear.
And as a counter to that, the idea of decoloniality was brought up.
Right. This is about actively dismantling the legacy of colonialism in the AI space, ensuring that African nations have control over their own data, that AI is developed using ethical frameworks grounded in African values, that the benefits from AI actually stay within Africa.
So it's about reclaiming agency in the tech world.
Exactly.
What are some of the challenges in achieving this decolonization of AI in Africa?
Well, the dominance of Western tech norms is huge.
Okay.
And there's often a lack of local expertise and infrastructure and a reliance on those big tech companies for essential things like hardware and software.
So overcoming those dependencies is a major hurdle.
It is.
The material also highlighted the issue of gender biases in AI.
Right, which is a concern everywhere, but can be particularly acute in Africa.
Okay.
Because AI systems can end up reinforcing existing gender inequalities and cultural biases.
Right. So it's not just about the technology itself, it's about the social context in which it's being used.
Exactly. It's about who's designing these systems, what data they're trained on, what assumptions they're making.
And finally, the document briefly discussed AI safety in Nigeria.
Right, and it used this really interesting analogy with road transportation safety.
Okay.
It pointed out that when cars were first introduced in Nigeria, there were major safety issues.
Right.
Despite regulations and efforts to improve things, Nigeria still has a high rate of road accidents.
Okay.
And the point was, we need to learn from this with AI. We need to be proactive about safety right from the start, especially in crucial areas like healthcare, transportation, energy.
So thinking about the potential consequences before those consequences happen.
Exactly.
It's been an eye-opening deep dive.
It has.
We've covered a lot of ground, from India's efforts to build AI literacy within its government to the really complex considerations around trustworthy AI in Africa.
Both regions are trying to harness AI for good, but they're navigating unique challenges and opportunities.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up, here's a question for our listeners to ponder. How can individuals, organizations, and governments in both India and Africa work together to build those inclusive, ethical, and beneficial AI ecosystems that put people first, that address local needs, and that consider the broader impact on society? How can we share knowledge and resources, learn from each other's experiences, and collaborate to create a future where AI is truly a force for positive change? It's a big question, but it's one we need to be asking ourselves as we move forward in this rapidly evolving technological landscape.
It's a question for all of us.